When awakening begins, something unexpected unfolds. It isn't that I start to change people directly, but rather, my presence begins to reveal what they still hide from themselves. The ego survives through illusion. It needs agreement, validation, and familiarity. It feeds on the comfort of knowing others see the world the same way. But when awakening happens, that silent contract breaks. I no longer support the collective dream, and the moment I stop feeding it, those still asleep begin to feel uneasy. I've realized that truth rarely comforts the ego. It's more like sunlight to eyes that have lived too long in darkness. At first, it blinds. And the ego calls that light harsh, even though it's simply revealing what was always there. As awareness deepens, people sometimes pull away. I might speak softly, while others argue loudly. I might forgive, while others hold grudges. I might remain calm when others panic. And this difference unsettles them. My peace shows them their restlessness, and that reflection is not easy to face. The ego doesn't want to be seen. It prefers to keep its stories unchallenged. It thrives on drama, conflict, and comparison. It whispers, "I'm right and you're wrong, I'm good and you're bad." But when awareness enters the room, that game begins to fall apart. Because I no longer play it. And the moment I refuse, others feel exposed, as if their masks suddenly lost meaning. I've noticed that awakening doesn't always create harmony at first. It disturbs the balance that the ego tries to maintain. Awareness and ego can't coexist comfortably, because one needs control and the other needs freedom. And freedom doesn't ask for permission. It's like a still pond. Drop a single pebble into it, and the ripples move outward, touching everything. That's what awakening does. It sends vibrations through the illusion, not to destroy it, but to awaken motion where there was stagnation. And yet, many fear those ripples, because movement means change, and change is what the ego resists most. I've learned that disturbing the ego doesn't mean attacking anyone. It's simply what happens when clarity meets distortion. The same way a clear bell breaks thin glass, not out of aggression, but out of resonance. Truth has a vibration that the false cannot survive. As consciousness grows, I find myself unable to participate in certain conversations. I can't pretend to enjoy gossip. I can't celebrate anger as strength or pride as virtue. And when I choose silence instead of noise, people misread it. They think I'm judging them. They say, "You've changed," as if that were an accusation. And they're right. I have changed. I've changed from pretending to being, from needing validation to simply resting in what is. And those who still depend on illusion sense this difference the way a shadow senses light approaching. At times, they resist. They question motives, beliefs, and authenticity. But I've learned their reaction isn't truly about me. It's their ego defending itself against what it cannot manipulate. Awareness doesn't seek applause. It doesn't argue to be right. It simply reflects. And in that reflection, people see what they've avoided. Some are grateful. Others become defensive. But either way, awareness fulfills its nature by revealing. The deeper I go into this realization, the more I notice that unconscious energy gravitates toward consciousness. It's as if awareness acts like a light in the dark. Everything unresolved begins to move toward it. Not to attack it, but to be seen, to be healed. Still, to the unprepared mind, that light feels threatening. Friends, family, co-workers, sometimes they pull away or project their fears onto me. I don't blame them. It's not rejection. It's energy reorganizing itself. It's life showing where harmony has not yet reached. Awakening is both a blessing and a disruption. You cannot wake within a dream and expect the dream to remain still. When awareness opens its eyes, the illusion trembles. And that trembling is what others feel when they meet your peace. When I no longer compete, people who live by comparison feel unseen. When I refuse to play victim, those who depend on sympathy call me detached. When I stop judging, the judgmental feel uncomfortable in my presence. This is the cost of freedom, to live without the illusions that once made you belong. The ego in others will always try to pull you back into the old dance. It uses guilt, misunderstanding, or ridicule. It says, "You don't care anymore, you think you're better." But awareness is not superiority, it's simplicity. It's not trying to rise above, it's returning to what is real. I've learned not to shrink my light just to protect someone else's comfort. No one truly hates the light. They only hate the moment before their eyes adjust. So I stay patient. I stay kind. And I keep shining. Some will leave. Some will resist. That's part of their process. But one day, something within them will remember. They'll hear an echo of the peace that once disturbed them. And they'll understand that the disturbance was grace in disguise. When I disturb someone's ego, I don't take pride in it. It isn't a victory. It's simply what happens when illusion meets awareness. My role is not to fix anyone, but to remain authentic. Because truth doesn't convince. It reveals. I let others have their reactions. I don't defend myself against misunderstanding. Stillness carries more truth than explanation ever could. Like water that softens stone over time, awareness does its quiet work. And I've seen how resistance slowly fades. The same people who once felt irritated by your calmness begin to find peace in it. Because the ego can't fight forever. Eventually, it surrenders. And what remains after the storm is clarity. That's the paradox of awakening. At first, it disturbs. But in time, it heals. And every person you disturb on the way becomes another wave in the ocean of awakening. The deeper I awaken, the clearer I see that the disturbance I cause is not personal. It is life adjusting to a higher vibration. Awareness does not destroy, it reveals. And revelation often feels like chaos to the unprepared mind. When consciousness expands, everything built upon illusion begins to shake. Relationships, habits, desires, all of them start to realign. Those who were comfortable with the old version of me feel uncertain now, because the game we once played no longer makes sense. I no longer respond in the expected way, and that confuses the ego. The truth is, awakening removes the false roles. I stop being what others projected onto me, and start being what I really am. To the ego, this feels like loss. It feels as if I have disappeared. But I have not vanished, I have simply stopped pretending. I have noticed that peace unsettles people more than conflict. When someone shouts and I do not react, their ego loses its opponent. When someone expects guilt and I respond with understanding, their ego has nowhere to hide. It is not me they are fighting, but their own reflection. I do not argue with illusion. I allow it to exhaust itself. Awareness does not need to defend truth, it only needs to remain clear. And in time, clarity speaks louder than words ever could. What I have come to understand is that awakening is not about being untouched by life. It is about flowing with it, even when it feels uncomfortable. There is a deep trust that grows, a knowing that everything unfolds as it must. Even the resistance of others becomes part of the divine choreography. Sometimes, people's reactions reveal exactly where they are trapped. Their discomfort becomes their teacher, though they may not recognize it yet. When they project anger or envy, I can see their pain beneath it. And if I stay calm, that energy begins to transform, not through confrontation, but through presence. The ego fears presence because presence has no story. And without a story, the ego cannot exist. So when I meet others with pure attention, without judgment, something inside them begins to tremble. It is the false self realizing it has been seen. I used to think my purpose was to awaken others. Now I know that awareness needs no missionary. It spreads on its own, like fragrance from a flower, like warmth from a flame. If my being disturbed someone's ego, that disturbance might one day become the crack through which their light enters. I have learned to be gentle with the world, even when it resists me. To love it without needing it to change. Because what resists today might surrender tomorrow. And what rejects truth now might seek it when the suffering becomes too heavy to bear. I no longer measure understanding by agreement. Agreement belongs to the ego. Awareness only cares about authenticity. I would rather stand alone in truth than be surrounded by comfortable lies. This path has shown me that solitude is not loneliness. It is spaciousness. When I stop seeking approval, the silence that follows is not empty, it is alive. In that stillness, I meet myself again. I realize that the same awareness within me breathes through all beings, even those who resist me. The more I rest in this understanding, the less reactive I become. Words that once would have offended me now pass like wind through leaves. I no longer take anything personally, because I see that everyone is acting out their own inner conflict. They are not truly reacting to me, but to the mirror that I represent. And so, awakening becomes an act of compassion. Not pity, not superiority, but quiet compassion. Because I know that I too once lived under the same spell of illusion, defending shadows as if they were light. How could I condemn anyone for still dreaming, when I spent so long asleep myself? I let people be what they are. I no longer need to convince them of anything. Convincing belongs to the world of debate, and truth does not debate. It simply is. There was a time when I thought awakening meant escaping life. Now I understand that it means embracing it fully. To disturb the ego is not to destroy it, but to integrate it. To let it serve awareness rather than rule it. When I stop fighting the ego, both mine and others, something miraculous happens. The fight dissolves. What remains is understanding. And from that understanding grows a peace that no argument can break. The more I surrender to this peace, the lighter I become. I no longer need to explain myself. I no longer need to fix others. I no longer need to protect an image of who I think I am. Awareness takes care of itself. Sometimes I watch the way people tense when faced with silence. They rush to fill it, because silence reveals what words hide. But I have come to love silence. It is not emptiness. It is fullness without noise. It is life breathing without effort. When I remain silent in the face of misunderstanding, the ego cannot find its enemy. And slowly, even the loudest resistance begins to soften. This is why awakening often disturbs at first but heals in the end. The disturbance is only the noise of transformation. If others cannot understand, I let them walk their path. Everyone awakens in their own way, through their own friction, in their own time. I cannot force awareness upon anyone, and I have no desire to. Life does the work. It always has. I have seen how the very people who once resisted awareness the most become its greatest messengers later. Suffering humbles the ego, and when the mask finally cracks, the truth enters quietly. That is why I do not see conflict as failure. It is simply another form of awakening waiting to ripen. Everything that disturbs me or others eventually serves awareness. Even resistance is sacred, because it defines the space in which surrender becomes possible. Without tension, there is no release. Without shadow, light would have no meaning. And so I continue walking through this strange dance of human consciousness, not as a preacher, not as a saint, but as a witness. Each encounter becomes a reflection. Each misunderstanding becomes a lesson in compassion. Each silence becomes a doorway into deeper truth. Awakening has taught me to let life speak through me, rather than trying to speak over it. When I stop controlling, words come naturally. When I stop defending, peace arises by itself. This is what it means to disturb people's egos, not through intention, but through authenticity. And even though it may isolate me at times, it is a sacred isolation. Because in that solitude, I discover the quiet company of the universe itself. The more I awaken, the more I understand that disturbing the ego is not an act of rebellion, but an act of love. It is love in its purest form, the kind that reveals rather than pleases, the kind that shakes illusions until truth can be seen beneath the noise. There was a time when I tried to avoid disturbing anyone. I wanted to keep peace, to make everyone comfortable, to soften every sharp edge. But peace built on pleasing others is not real peace. It is only silence born from fear. True peace is unshakable because it does not depend on approval. Now I no longer worry about being misunderstood. I know that those who are meant to understand will feel the truth, even if their minds resist it. The mind fights what the heart already knows. And awareness is simply the process of remembering what was never forgotten. Sometimes people say, "Why can't you just let things be?" But awakening has nothing to do with control. It is not about letting or forcing. It is about seeing that life is already flowing perfectly on its own. The more I step aside, the more everything aligns by itself. Awareness does not make me superior, it makes me transparent. It allows existence to move through me without distortion. And in that movement, I disturb illusions simply by existing. Not because I wish to, but because truth cannot hide. I have noticed that my presence now carries a different energy. When I walk into a room, I can feel the tension between the self that pretends and the self that observes. The ego senses it too. It becomes alert, defensive, searching for something to protect. But if I stay quiet long enough, the resistance softens. The awareness within them begins to remember itself through me. I no longer see people as asleep or awake, enlightened or ignorant. Those are labels of the mind. What I see are stages of the same awakening, moments of the same consciousness unfolding through countless forms. Even resistance is a form of participation. Even denial is part of the path back home. The ego cannot be destroyed by force. Force only feeds it. It is undone by observation, by understanding, by love. That is why the awakened disturb others at first but eventually bring healing. Every clash between truth and illusion is a conversation between the soul and its own reflection. When I stopped trying to wake people up, something beautiful happened. Life began to use me naturally. Words would arise when needed. Silence would come when it was wiser than speech. And I realized that the world doesn't need saving, it needs seeing. Awareness is the only revolution. I have learned that the more I surrender, the less resistance I meet. Because life mirrors what I am. If I fight, it fights back. If I rest, it rests with me. And through that rhythm, existence teaches me over and over again that harmony does not require control, only trust. Sometimes the disturbance I cause is not visible. It happens in subtle ways, in conversations that shift tone, in hearts that suddenly feel uncomfortable with their own stories. That discomfort is not a mistake, it is the first tremor of awakening. Awareness shakes the foundations so that the truth can be rebuilt. I have stopped apologizing for being who I am. Authenticity is not arrogance. It is simply the absence of pretense. And I understand now that living truthfully is the most compassionate thing I can do, even when it unsettles those still hiding behind their masks. The world needs people who disturb illusions, not through anger, but through presence. People who love deeply enough to stop enabling lies. People who remain centered while others project chaos. That is what real strength looks like. It does not shout, it does not prove, it simply stands quietly and shines. Each time I am misunderstood, I remember that it is not personal. Egos cannot recognize what is beyond them. They must first exhaust their stories, experience their own pain, and finally surrender to what has always been true. Until then, I remain as I am, a mirror for those who are ready to see, and invisible to those who are not. There are moments when solitude feels like a companion. The silence after disturbance becomes sacred. It is in that silence where I remember that I am not the one doing anything. Life itself is the teacher. I am only the expression through which it speaks. I watch the world with tenderness now. Even in its madness, I see beauty. Even in its conflict, I see awakening trying to happen. Every argument, every fear, every resistance is part of consciousness learning how to see itself clearly. Disturbing people's egos is not a mission, it is an inevitability of truth. Wherever awareness stands, illusion trembles. Wherever love appears, fear dissolves. That is the law of existence, and I have learned to trust it completely. If someone feels disturbed by my calm, that is their invitation to discover their own. If someone reacts to my silence, it means their own silence is calling them. Everything is connected, every reaction is part of the great unfolding. And I have no need to interfere, only to witness. Awakening is not a war against the ego. It is the realization that there was never an enemy at all. Only misunderstanding. Only sleep pretending to be separate from the dreamer. When I understand this, all conflict disappears. Now I let life carry me. I let awareness breathe me. There is no effort left, only presence. And in that presence, I see that disturbing people's egos was never about them or me. It was about consciousness remembering itself through contrast. So I walk quietly, allowing everything to be as it is. If I disturb with love. If I awaken through gentleness. If I am rejected, I bless the rejection. Because all of it belongs to the same flow. There is nothing left to fix. Nothing left to prove. The truth stands on its own, unshaken, unbothered, endlessly alive. And I stand with it, not as a teacher, not as a savior, but as awareness itself, aware of being aware. That is the essence of awakening. It disturbs before it heals. It shakes before it settles. And in that dance of light and shadow, life remembers what it truly is.